What next for Chris Eubank Jr.? We are told that the Conor Benn fight is dead in the water at the moment and it isn't going to happen anytime soon. Eddie Hearn thinks that Eubank Jr. will eventually come back to the table and start discussing the Conor Benn fight again because of the fact that he can't make that kind of money anywhere else. But perhaps Eubank Jr. still has ambitions beyond just making a load of money, as in ambitions to become a legitimate world champion at some point in his career. He is 34 years of age, so he obviously needs to get a move on. Now, with regards to the fallout of the Conor Benn fight, Eubank Jr. was holding Eddie Hearn to his word in negotiations, because Eddie Hearn kept saying that it's the biggest British fight in history and all this type of stuff. And so behind the scenes, Chris Eubank was saying, well, if it's the biggest fight in British boxing history, then I want to be paid money, which is representative of how big the fight is supposed to be in your words, right? And Eddie Hearn apparently turned around to him, and this is Eddie Hearn confessing it in an interview, and said, well, I'm a promoter, I say a lot of things. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I'm exaggerating, right? So that should be a lesson for Eddie Hearn, really. If you don't want fighters to make what you deem to be unreasonable financial demands, then don't talk and hype a fight up to such a ridiculous extent, because as far as I'm concerned, it was never the biggest British fight of all time or anything like that. I said at the time when Eddie Hearn was coming out with all this hype that that's a load of rubbish. But again, fighters have every right, if that's the kind of stuff you're talking in public, to hold you to it. So there's a lesson there for Eddie Hearn as far as I'm concerned. Now, for Chris Eubank Jr., if he isn't going to fight Conor Benn, let's have a look at the middleweight rankings here, if we scroll down. So Janabek Alim Kanuli has 2 of the belts. I've gone on record previously and said that I think that's a very bad fight for Chris Eubank Jr. If he wants to become a champion, I think he needs to target the other 2 champions rather than Alim Kanuli. And obviously he is number 1 contender with the WBO. And of course, Alim Kanuli has the WBO belt. But the WBC champion is Jamal Charlo. Carlos Adames is, what is he now? The interim champion or something like that. But Jamal Charlo is the full champion. Then, of course, you've got the WBA champion, Erislandy Lara. I would say out of the 2, Charlo stylistically is the better for Eubank Jr. Also with the inactivity. He did come back recently, Charlo, and have a fight. Didn't look amazing in that fight. So I think that would be the one for Eubank Jr. to go for. If not, then Erislandy Lara. Now, Lara stylistically is all wrong for Eubank, but he is old and he's small. This is a guy coming up from 154. So he isn't the same force that he used to be. He isn't as elusive as he used to be. He's more hittable now. But again, stylistically, it's still a bad matchup for Eubank Jr., but it's still preferable, in my view, to fighting Janabek Alim Kanuli. The only caveat I'll add is that Alim Kanuli did struggle a little bit with Denzel Bentley, and Bentley boxed in a way that Eubank Jr. is very capable of. He applied pressure, he stayed in the pocket, he was throwing hard whenever he did get close to Alim Kanuli. Eubank Jr. can do that and probably do a better job than Denzel Bentley, but I get the feeling that Alim Kanuli underestimated Bentley, wasn't really completely at the races in that fight. Not necessarily ill or injured or anything like that, although I guess it's possible, but just wasn't focused, didn't really think that Bentley would bring much to the table, underestimated him basically. Against Chris Eubank Jr., he knows that Eubank Jr. is somewhat of a name, even if he hasn't really achieved anything at world level. He knows that that's a big fight financially, and I think that would bring the best out of Alim Kanuli, and he would absolutely turn up and show out. And I think it would be too much for Eubank. I would expect Eubank to lose that fight, probably on points in a quite one-sided fashion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Eubank Jr. proves that he's far better than I'm, giving him credit for. But that's what I think would happen. I think stylistically, Eubank Jr. is better when he fights aggressive guys. Obviously, he lost that first fight to Liam Smith. It didn't go the way that he wanted it to go. But in the rematch, he rectified it and he did what most of us thought he was going to do first time around. He did it in the second fight. So I still think that stylistically, Eubank Jr., I'm not saying he can beat every pressure fighter out there at all. Evidently, he can't. But I still think pressure fighting opponents, who have that come forward style, suit Eubank better than these boxers, particularly southpaws. So that's my take on what Eubank Jr. should do next. If he wants to become a champion, I would say target Jamal Charlo or Erislan Lara and stay away from Janabek Alim Kanuli, at least until you've got a belt. When you got a belt, yeah, you got to unify. You got to fight the best out there. You've got a moral and in some cases legal obligation to fight better opposition than you do when you're a contender. But while he remains a contender right now, I think the wisest thing to do, particularly at the age of 34, 35, let me just double check his age, he's 34, particularly at the age of 34, and he's had a, long career at this point, is go for the lowest hanging fruit if you want to become a champion. So that's my take on it. And maybe if he becomes a champion, he'll still try and fight Conor Benn after that, once he's got that achievement in the bag, he'll say, okay, let's divert my attention back to Conor Benn and try and get this big cash grab. I'm not sure how that would work out with regards to his world title. Maybe he'd have to vacate it because Conor Benn, of course, will be jumping up 2 weight divisions. Would that get the approval of the sanctioning body? Well, it's possible. J.R. Patara obviously didn't get approval for his recent fight against Ellis Zorro, but it all depends on the fighter. It all depends on the sanctioning body. The others, aside from the IBF, don't tend to be as strict, and they tend to go by the idea of, money talks and BS walks. So that's what I think of that. Let me know what you guys think of Chris Eubank Jr.'s career at this point, who you think he should fight next, what you think his next move should be.